What is up, guys? My name is Jason Ankin and this is my vlog channel. What is up? So I'm back again. So yes, bank holiday today, so the parents are home but they're away out. So I'm about to just produce this 30-minute video. So what I'm going to talk about today is something I've been looking into a lot more recently, and it's basically politics. Many people don't really, in general, pay too much attention to politics, and to be honest, I never really paid attention to politics either until probably about 2015. I really started to I heard about it vicariously through watching podcasts. One individual that got me really interested into politics in particular was an individual called Jordan Peterson. Now, I would watch his videos on the Joe Rogan Experience, and basically he would talk about political things. Obviously, Jordan Peterson is a psychologist, or a psychotherapist, or a psychiatrist, or whatever he's called, and a professor. And basically, he's an intellectual. He goes around giving talks about he talks about a lot of things: theology, philosophy, religion, psychology, politics, even peak performance and stuff like that. So a lot of his content is right up my street. I like listening to him, and from that I became much more interested in politics, and I began to understand the dynamic, because prior to that I didn't really pay attention to politics at all. Like, I was virtually apolitical. I didn't have any time, effort, or energy to study politics. I didn't know the difference between right wing and left wing, conservative or Labour. Even in my country, I couldn't tell you the distinguishing qualities between the conservative Tories in our country and Labour Party. But now I guess I understand it a little bit more. And then obviously there was this big movement, especially across America, and it's happening everywhere in Western countries, where there's these what's called SJWs, so these social justice warriors or whatever. And basically they're just these kind of extremists, and they're basically hard left wing, and they're really interested in things like, well, it centers around equality, and they have a big they're trying to get equal rights for minorities in every shape or form. So things like people with different colors, different sexualities, different genders and stuff like that. And I started to wonder, what the hell is this stuff? Where did this come from, and what is this all about? Like, because I'd never experienced people like this that were so extreme about getting pushing their political agenda. And so I started to pay attention to it, and then obviously around about 2016 there was a few significant changes that happened politically in the West. In particular in America was the nomination of Donald Trump to be in president, and then also in our country we had Brexit, and these two things basically they happened at the same time, and there seems to be a link between these two things. It's almost like people are kind of fed up with the current political climate, and there seems to be a swing to the right wing in politics. And these are some of the trends that are beginning to occur. And basically, I didn't vote in Brexit because I didn't know what Brexit was at the time. I paid so little attention to politics whatsoever that I didn't even know what Brexit was. I didn't even know what the European Union was, to be honest. You know, when I was growing up, I remember there was a vote for whether the UK joins. I'm from Northern Ireland, by the way, which is part of the UK. So I remember there was a vote on whether we adopted the euro or we kept the pound. And I thought that was like joining the EU. And the fact that we kept the pound meant that we were still an independent country or whatever. I was clueless about politics. So Brexit, I didn't know what it was. And then obviously after these kind of events, Trump gets elected, Brexit happens, I started to pay attention more to politics. I was wondering what the hell is going on around the world, and ever since then I've been kind of studying. I probably watch political videos, I would say every day on a daily basis. There's a number of channels that I follow on YouTube. So there's a number of channels I follow on YouTube and a number of podcasts where I've learned a little bit more about the different dynamics. So to my knowledge, politics can really be summarized in sort of, there's this thing called the political compass. Now obviously this isn't exactly fundamentally what politics is about, but it's a very good sort of way of understanding where you kind of fit in the sort of political spectrum. So you have what's called the social spectrum, and it's a top-down dimension. So you've got authoritarian types versus libertarian types. So authoritarian types are individuals that like control over people. So they want to control, limit freedom, lots of regulation, the sort of management of resources, the management of basically everything, money, fuel, food. They like to control it all and distribute it in a kind of authoritarian kind of way. The opposite end of the spectrum is what's referred to as libertarian. So libertarian is centered around autonomy. It's centered around freedom. So individuals that like to have their freedom. They like minimal government. They like to be left to their own devices. Small governments. And sort of the extreme of these two poles, so the extreme of authoritarianism is referred to as fascism, and the extreme of libertarianism is anarchy. So I think that's called the social spectrum, and then you have what's called the right-left spectrum, and this is whether you are right-wing or left-wing. And right-wing tends to be conservative, and left-wing tends to be liberal. Now so conservatives, it's really in the name. It's about conservation. So learning to conserve things like traditions, kind of financially frugal, given more to do with like free markets and giving people sort of lower taxes, stuff like that. And then the liberal is more about change, progress. In fact, conservatism would be like perennialism. So there's a thing called perennialism. Perennialism is kind of like the type of trees called perennial. The perennialist group of trees are the trees that don't lose their leaves during autumn and winter. And that's why they're called perennial, because it's everlasting. So conservatives would be more perennialist. They're more interested in age-old truths, traditions, ancient ways of life that have always kind of been valued and stuff like that. Whereas the liberals, they're a bit more what's referred to as progressive. So progressives basically like change. They're social catalysts. They like to break down old systems and advance and progress into the future. They're kind of more future orientated, I guess. Whereas the conservatives would be more past orientated, sort of retaining that which was good about the past. And liberals tend to be, no, let's progress forward into the future. So there's an interesting, and obviously there's extremes of these two poles as well. So the extreme of conservatism, we witnessed, so the extreme of conservatism would be just too much order, too much rigidity, lack of flexibility. Almost think like, I would say like the Amish. Like the Amish would be very right-wing conservative. They kind of just get stuck in this kind of suspended animation where they don't make any progress. They have enough and they just stick there, and that keeps them kind of in this kind of, in their little conservative kind of way. And the extreme of left wing would be like socialism, communism, stuff like that, which is also you know, about extreme equality, you know, everybody's equal, and stuff like that. Now, there's a test you can do on the internet. I will link it down below. It is called the Political Compass. So basically it just asks you a number of questions. And obviously with all tests, you know, it's not to be taken as doctrine. It just gives you a snapshot of where you sort of fit. And it's interesting, temperamentally, I came out as left-wing libertarian, in the left-wing libertarian quadrant, which was kind of a little bit unexpected. I thought maybe I'd be more centrist. I think actually libertarianism definitely suits me. If I was ever to get into a political discussion, I always find myself defending the libertarian perspective. I believe in autonomy, I believe in freedom, personal responsibility, the right to choose. Also, I like minimal government. I don't like big governments telling me what to do. And I always noticed, because growing up I was always very triggered by authoritarian types. So people who used to tell me what to do. When you're a libertarian temperament, you're very sensitive to when someone's trying to encroach upon your freedom. So I was always very averse to authorities, whether that was my parents, whether it was older kids. Even like I would stand up to kids who were older than me and who would try to bully me, because I would always I would just know that what you're doing is you're encroaching on my freedom. I would stand up to teachers, to police, everyone. So I was always very averse to external authority. I used to be in the military at one point, and on a number of occasions I got into arguments with people in positions of authority over me, and that was very bold, because when you're in sort of military training, you cannot step out of line. And I would do this. I would step out of line and basically say, you can't tell me what to do. Or I was always very triggered by authoritarian types. So yeah, I probably would align myself. I would more comfortably call myself a libertarian, not so much left-wing libertarian. Maybe I'd lean a little left on some issues. But I also have very conservative views as well, and this is why I would consider myself to be quite centrist. You know, I believe in God, for example, which is seen as quite perennialist. There's this thing called pro-life and pro-choice, and that's basically the abortion debate. I actually put myself on the pro-life side of things, which is conservative, and stuff like that. And I would say economic policies, conservative economic policies are better, in my opinion, because things like lowering taxes, minimizing expenses, it gives people more freedom to work. Therefore, they have more incentive to actually be more productive. So you have more productive citizens. So for example, if you have low taxes in a given country, it draws people to that country because they realize, oh, I can make a lot of money there. So they go to these countries that have low taxes and they work their ass off. So they come into the country and they be super productive. And then conservatives are also quite reluctant to be frivolous with their spending. So they make a lot of cuts. And obviously these cuts, especially on a countrywide level, can be devastating, you know, because certain groups might not get the money that they need. But it's over the long term, it's better, because if you're conservative, you'll grow your financial pot, and basically then that money can be used for really important things like plumbing, electricity, food distribution, security, stuff like that. So I would be conservative in those views as well. So I would consider myself like a centrist libertarian. But left-wing views I have is I'm quite... see, this is where I struggle, and because I actually don't really know what my sort of left-wing opinions really are. I would say one of the things that's really big these days is this concept of globalization. And I would actually consider myself to align with a globalist worldview. And it's not necessarily my opinion. I'm not saying that we should all become globalist. It's just an observation. When you look at the world, you know, it's very simple. 1,000 years ago, in comparison to today, we're more globalist today than we were 1,000 years ago. So there's this natural progression to a globalization. And it's very likely that in 1,000 years from now, from today, we'll be more globalized in the future. And it just follows logically. It's not an ideology, it's not a belief, it's merely an observation of what is actually unfolding. Because it's really simple logic. When you have increased complexity, so for example, there's 7 billion people in the world. They all need food, they all need energy, they all need medical treatment, they need water, they need security. So there's this, it's a very, very complex thing, a problem to solve. And because it's a complex problem to solve, we're naturally going to move towards increased organization. So increased complexity will naturally lead to increased organization. And people get freaked out about this whole one world thing, that somehow there's going to be this one world government, this one world religion, this one world military and one world political system and government and all of this type of stuff. And everyone just assumes that this is going to be bad for some reason. I don't know why it's assumed that it's going to be bad. But why does it have to be bad? Why can't it just be good? You know, if the majority of the people on planet Earth are good, then the system that we live within will be good. If the majority of people on planet Earth are bad, then this one world system that we're within will be bad. It's really simple logic. So it boils down to individual. See, this is the thing. It's we're individually contributing towards this globalist system. So for example, people have individual actions. So you do something, right? And if it's good, then you repeat that action repetitively. If you do another action and it's bad, then you stop doing those actions. And what happens is everybody collectively does this over time. And eventually what people will move towards is increased cooperation, because they'll see that if we cooperate with one another, it's actually better than competing with each other. So it's almost like everybody's individual action is contributing to this globalized system collectively. And I just think it's inevitable. Like we're inevitably going to move towards this globalist system. And I guess that's where I would kind of lean left. But one criticism that I would have of it is that if we do become totally and utterly integrated, what happens if that single system collapses? Then it affects everybody collectively. So that would be the big danger that I would see in kind of like a globalist system, a one world system, is what if that system fails? Then if that system fails, then it's game over for a huge ton of people. So there maybe needs to be a globalist system, but that also has individual systems. So for example, I live in Europe. If let's say one of the countries in the EU collapses, their economy collapses or whatever, well, that individual country system can be contained. So you can contain that system, and the other countries around the outside can kind of prop it up and support it. So there would be less of a negative impact the further and further you get away from that country, kind of thing. So if one country falls, then it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the other countries' systems are going to fall as a consequence, unless it's something like America, because America is obviously this huge system that's sort of all encompassing. It's kind of there's a saying, I think, when America sneezes, everybody else gets a cold. But this has been the case throughout, from the beginning of time. You know, there's always been a superpower that's been the most dominant country in the world. For example, in the ancient past, it was Egypt. After that, I think it was the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans, then the British Empire, and now we've got this American Empire kind of thing. So there's always been a superpower that has been the most dominant country in the world and the most dominant system in the world. So that would be kind of where I would align left wing, because I do believe that we do need more organization, and I can see I can see it being I can see it making sense that we would have a one world government. I don't know whether it's theoretically possible. My view is purely idealistic, because obviously it's never happened before in history. So it's an idealistic view that seems to make sense logically, but it might not work, and we might actually have to have multiple decentralized systems. You know, because obviously we have evidence of this working. We live in it now, and we're kind of moving towards this unified system slowly but surely. But it'll be you know, we'll try it out, and it'll probably, certain parts will fail, and we'll fix those, and it'll just be a process of trial and error, and eventually, you know, maybe in a couple of 100 years, we will be like a unified, you know, people around the world. We'll have a one world government, a one world system. But it's kind of weird, because, like, you know, I don't really know if globalization is actually a left-wing thing, because people would say that nationalism, if you're a nationalist, someone who's really just very militant about your country, that would be considered as hard right-wing. But in reality, the same exact principles that are used to hold together a nation can actually be scaled up to the globe. So for example, a globalized system might actually end up being just a large scale version of nationalism, or global nationalism, or whatever. So I don't know if it's actually a left-wing issue. I think the only reason the left aligns with globalization, because it means the getting rid of nationalism, and obviously because the left is very progressive, it's a catalyst. It likes to break down current systems to move towards new systems. But so there's this kind of temporary alignment with getting rid of nationalism to move towards globalization. But maybe in the future, globalization will actually become a right-wing thing, because it's essentially global nationalism, essentially, because then you would have one single overall system that people maybe over a couple of centuries would eventually align with, and it'd be, this is our global system, and then eventually they would be reluctant to give that up in the future, and then it would probably become like a conservative perennialist system. Who knows? That would be hundreds and hundreds of years in the future. So yeah, basically, and I'm not really, so yeah, that's a bit of a rant there. So I want to start talking a little bit more about politics, because it is something that I study on a day-to-day basis. I do think it relates to lifestyle. It's large-scale lifestyles, what's going on around the globe. You know, it's large-scale social issues that can affect you as an individual. And I don't vote. I've never voted in my life. And the reason why I don't vote is because my simple logic, the reason why I don't vote is, well, first of all, I live in a democracy, so I have the right to choose not to vote, as well as the right to choose who to vote for. A democracy gives me the right not to vote, so I choose not to vote. And the reason why I choose not to vote is basically because everything that I want the government to do, they're already doing. So I want things like food distribution, I want things like medical treatment, I want things like plumbing, I want social opportunities, I want job opportunities, housing, local, national, international security. These are all the things that I want the government to do, and they're doing them. So I don't see the logic in voting for anybody. The only reason why I would vote in the future is if I started to notice those things disappearing, like meaning that they started to disappear. Maybe if an authoritarian type started to come into power, I would vote against them. And this is the thing, I'm quite flexible. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself to be right wing or left wing, in that I would look at the individual politician and the individual political group and see whether they are necessary for the current situation. So I would vote based on a situation basis. I would be quite flexible. I would have no problem, if needs be, voting Conservative. I would have no problem, if needs be, voting Liberal. I think the main battle that's going on in the world, especially around the West right now, because we have it pretty damn good, all of those things that I listed, we have, we've got all the resources we need. We're safe, good enforcement of human rights, good security, wealthy, healthy, all of that good stuff in these sort of Western countries. So it seems that the whole political environment now it's a culture war. So it's like, who controls the narrative? Who controls the overarching narrative that's essentially going to be the narrative within the West? Are we going to be a traditionalist kind of conservative perennialist kind of system, or are we going to be like a liberal progressive kind of system? But as a libertarian, I don't really care. I don't really care about sort of what system that we have, as long as I have all of those things that I mentioned, and that you don't take them away. I actually think there's too much government. I would like to see government shrink a little bit. It's becoming a little bit overarching. I actually work for the government as well, so I have to be very careful with my wording when I'm putting these videos up on YouTube, so I don't say anything controversial. I try to be quite balanced. But yeah, this is really what I just wanted to talk about. These are, like I said, I just literally stick on the camera and basically come up with a single topic and just start waffling. So yeah, there you have it, guys. I'm going to probably leave it there. And so yes, so I wanted to get that off my chest and talk a bit about my political views, so that I can again do future videos related to these. I'm not a political analyst, I'm not a reporter or anything like that. I literally watch videos on the internet and I formulate my own view. In many respects, I'm kind of a rationalist when it comes to that sense. I would say I make judgments based upon facts-based reasoning rather than what political identity I align with or whatever. It's a situational thing, but temperamentally I seem to be left-wing libertarian, and I would be willing to positively align myself with a libertarian worldview. So yeah, that's all I want to talk about today. Thank you for listening, guys. So yes, if you have any questions you want to ask, post them down below and I will try and answer them in the next video. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can follow me at jason.ankin. I will put a link in the description, so you can click that and follow me. So yes, guys, thank you for watching. My name is Jason Ankin. This is my vlog channel. I will see you next time.